Hi, loves, and welcome to the With Love Always podcast, a podcast to help you live the life you were created for. We are your hosts and your friends, Bree
and Marissa,
and we're so grateful you're here.
We pray you listen and leave feeling more inspired, encouraged, and uplifted.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode. We are so grateful, as always, that you are tuning in and joining us for this conversation today. For today's topic, we are diving into the topic of fear, and something that Marissa and I are so passionate about with every episode we record is that we tend to speak on topics that pertains to our current lives and things that we're going through. And so this is a topic that I feel very passionate about diving into today because fear is something that I'm currently experiencing a lot of in my own life. And when I've been reflecting on the different things that have caused fear in my heart and in my life and in the decisions I'm making, it made me just realize and recognize that, gosh, I imagine there's so many of you out there who are also navigating just those fears in your own life. And so I want to start off this conversation by reminding you that you're not alone and you're so welcomed here and you are invited to this table and into this conversation. And for you to know that in everything we're sharing today, this is something that I'm presently struggling with, and that is why I want to have this conversation, and that is the intention behind starting this conversation. So we love you guys, and let's dive into the scary topic of fear. To kickstart this conversation on fear, I was just really thinking about fear in the way that it's presented itself in my own life. And I broke it down into 3 different types of fears, just naturally in my mind and in my head. And then I actually looked up the different types of fears. And I mean, you can define it so many different ways, but I did actually find 3 different types of fears that kind of fell into what I was already describing as the 3 types of fears I identify in my own life. So just to kind of kickstart this conversation and even to help you start identifying if you're tuning into this episode and you know that you're struggling with fear in your life, I think sometimes it really helps when you put a description or a word to the type of fear you're experiencing and begin processing it and evaluating it through that lens. And so the 3 types of fears that I've identified in my life are the fear in circumstance. And so when I think of this type of fear in circumstance, I think of it as something physical. So that can be a physical threat, a physical fear, whatever that may be. And when I was looking it up, that can be identified as a rational fear. So what I identified as the fear in circumstance, such as physical threat, can be identified as a rational fear because anyone rationally would be scared of something that's physically threatening your safety. But the next type of fear that I've identified in my own life, which is actually probably one of the most prevalent fears I'm going through right now, is fear in decision and fear in life path. And when I was reading more up on this, I identified that this could be a primal fear in the sense that just when you're thinking about your future and when you're thinking about all the intricacies that lead to your future and your purpose and all that sort of stuff, I think that is a very natural type of fear to experience. And it's something that, we're all experiencing and we're all processing and we're all just kind of enduring. And so that is the second type of fear I've identified in my life. And then the last fear, which is also something that I would say I'm going through right now, is the fear in your emotions. And that can also be identified as potentially a irrational fear because I'm sure we all know that sometimes our emotions heighten things in a beautiful way, but also in a negative way. And I think when we are so driven by the emotions of things, that can kind of lead us to being irrational and building fears around things that may not even exist or may not even happen, or all those what if questions in your head of what if this happens and blah, 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 what if this person thinks this, or whatever that may be. It can often just be irrational when it's so emotionally charged. Those are just different types of fears that I've identified in my life, which I wanted to kind of define at the beginning of this conversation because I want to bring awareness that there isn't just one type of fear that you may be enduring if you're listening to this, and there's not one type of fear that I am navigating through. There's so many different types and so many different inflictions that can cause that in your life, and so just wanting to acknowledge that. But to just kind of dive into this conversation and bring relatability and just invite our perspectives and our stories into this, I want to ask Marissa, would you consider yourself a fearful person?
I honestly had to think about this one, and I'm going to go with yes. I think by nature, I'm inclined to be a little more fearful just because I would say I'm more like risk adverse. Like I see what could go wrong before I ever make a decision. So because of that, I'm just kind of confronted with like the challenges or the risks of a situation. So I think that can make me a little bit like hesitant or a little more cautious and fearful. But I do think I've worked really hard to push past a lot of those fears. So even though it might be more so in my nature to be fearful, I can still acknowledge that fear, but not necessarily act on it. So I would say I fall maybe more so in the middle, where I think if somebody were to see the decisions I've made or things I've done, they wouldn't necessarily think of me as fearful. And something I wanted to mention as we dive into this conversation, when I was asking myself that and trying to think through if I was fearful, something I looked at was the anxiety that's present in my life, because I think anxiety can be kind of a signal that there's a fear. And a lot of times it can be a fear that we're not necessarily like presently aware of. So I think we can have like these anxious thoughts or feelings, and it could be due to an underlying fear, such as like the fear of man or fear of like how people are going to perceive us, things like that, that can cause us to be overly cautious of decisions we make and having anxiety towards our future, things like that. And I just speak from personal experience with that. I feel like anxiety has definitely revealed some of the fears that sit a little below the surface that take some digging. So if you don't necessarily think of yourself as fearful, yet you have anxiety in your life, I think this conversation might actually allow you to kind of reevaluate how you look at fear and see if there are some things below the surface that you can kind of unpack. But I just want to ask you the same thing. If you think you're fearful, or if there's one of those three categories that you mentioned that you like specifically resonate with.
Yeah, well, first of all, that was so good. That was so good. You know, I actually feel like we're such a beautiful balance in so many ways, because I wouldn't consider myself a fearful person. I think I'm actually more inclined to risk. I don't know what it is. Like, I always say, like, I have like this little rebellious streak in me. Not rebellious in the sense that I would ever do anything harmful, but like I love like the thrill of things. Like I love doing things that scare me. Like I like to be scared. But at the same time, I'm a human. And even though I would consider myself someone who, by definition and reflecting on my day-to-day, my life, and a lot of the big risks I've taken so joyfully in my life, that doesn't mean by any means that I'm absent of fear. And I think one of the reasons why I am so like inclined and so just desperately wanting to have this conversation, because as someone who considers myself not a fearful person and equally not an anxious person, that is something that I have been going through so much recently. Of, I think what I find myself really evaluating so intensely right now is my emotions. I have a lot of emotions going on in my head based around a lot of decisions I'm making right now in my life that would affect so much of my future. So truthfully, one of the things that I have found myself having fear around and have just been emotionally navigating is dating right now. I have been single for a really long time, and I prayed so earnestly over my singleness. And I truthfully am someone who, I love my singleness so much, and I just know the type of partner that I am looking for. And right now, like, to be so transparent with y'all, like, I have someone in my life who I care about so immensely, and there is such a prospect on the table of deciding if I want to move forward into a relationship or remain as friends. And it is so scary for me, just because I think of all of the years of prayers and all the years of my singleness, and to be in a place where I'm making what feels like a really big decision that could change the trajectory of my next month and my next months ahead in life even. It is carrying a lot of weight in my life. And I think that's also something to so acknowledge in this conversation, is that whatever is bringing you fear may not like also be bad. It might actually be really, really beautiful. But that doesn't take away that the beauty and the fear can still coexist at the same time. So yeah, that's kind of like what I'm feeling fearful about right now. And like I said, just to clarify, like it is a beautiful type of fear, because I think in fear you start really navigating and like dissecting within yourself. Okay, what is the source of that fear? What is the insecurities behind that fear? Why am I fearful? What is it inducing? And I think the more that you really start breaking it down and like not just look at it from the surface, that is like where the freedom can be so found. And so just to kind of continue forward in this conversation, and I just love you. I just want to say, like, I love you guys so much, because I think there is truly such a safety to share so much of ourselves and our lives here on this podcast, and to simply know that even one person out there knows more about me than honestly probably a majority of people in my present life do. Like, it is such a gift and such an honor, because I feel like as much as I love to share, I feel so safe, like in the presence of everyone who's listening. So I love you guys so much. But I think when I'm just like thinking about fear, something that I actually wrote in preparation for this episode is just how fear paralyzes, it jeopardizes, and it only multiplies. Truly,
so
fear, when you submit to fear, you are so paralyzed. I've felt incapable of making a decision, incapable of knowing which way to go, incapable of evaluating things rightly. And when I sit and submit to that fear and submit to feeling paralyzed, it does lead to jeopardizing other things in my life. Like, it leads to jeopardizing an opportunity. It leads to jeopardizing maybe a conversation that needs to be had or a decision that needs to be made. And I find that the more that I sit in fear and allow it to paralyze me and jeopardize me from taking action or moving forward towards something, the more that it multiplies, and the more that you give opportunity for you to submit to fear in multiple areas of your life. And that is why I'm so just passionate about this topic today, because I don't want any of us, I don't want neither Marissa or I to be fearful people, and I don't want you to have to feel like you have to submit to that fear. And actually, such a funny story time that inspired this kind of topic as well about fear is actually something that happened to me when I was in Croatia, which I'm sure some of you guys know and some of y'all may not know, but I was in Croatia. I was traveling for about 2.5 weeks. It was such a beautiful time. I'm so grateful to be back and behind the mic again. I missed talking to you guys so deeply. But something that actually inspired this conversation was actually a really scary moment I physically had when I was in Croatia. So I think it was like the last city that we were in. We were in Dubrovnik, and we went to like this bar that also like you could cliff jump off of. And I will say the one thing that I am a little fearful of is cliff jumping. And I think I realized that on this trip. And anyways, I mean, I've cliff jumped before, but I got up on this rock, and I kid you not, it took me 20 minutes to jump off this cliff for the first time. It was so scary. Everyone was like encouraging me. They were like, you can do it. Like, don't be scared. And actually a comment that really stood out in my mind was like this one guy from like Australia or something was like, you just have to have faith. Like, you just have to walk almost blindly off the cliff and just trust that you know how to jump, and trust that you will land in the water and you will be fine. And honestly, I was like kind of convicted by that. But anyways, I did it once. Took me 20 minutes. I did it once. I actually went up there again, hyped on adrenaline, being like, I'm going to do it again, because I don't like feeling like I'm scared of something. So anyways, I go up on the cliff the second time, and I psyched myself out again. And it's so funny when we're in the face of fear, how we literally can forget what we are capable of moments before. Moments before, I literally jumped off this cliff. Moments later, I am now paralyzed and afraid again. And I literally did the same thing again. I was like standing on the cliff and I was like, I can't do it. I can't do it. Finally, I started running towards it. Last minute, psyched myself out. But it was too late. I was already like, feet were already off. But because I psyched myself out in fear, instead of jumping, I slid down this cliff like rocks against my back.
Oh my gosh.
And literally by the grace of the Lord was I like somehow unharmed, because there's photos of me and I literally look like I was going down the cliff like a slip and slide. Like it was or like a slide. It was just such a moment. And thankfully, of course, I landed in the water. There's nowhere else to go. And everyone was like spooked. They were like, oh my gosh, like, are you okay? And thankfully in the moment I was like, I'm so fine. But looking back at like the photo and the videos, I was like, dang, that was not good. Like I could have really hurt myself. And it just made me realize afterwards, like when I was reflecting on it and we were on our way to dinner, I was like, whoa, fear really causes more harm than the thing you're actually scared of.
Yes, 100%.
If I wasn't scared in the first place, and if I wasn't so quick to forget what I know I'm capable of doing moments before, I wouldn't have fallen the way that I fell. It wasn't the height that was the scary part. I mean, it was. Mm-hmm. It wasn't the height that harmed me. It wasn't my lack of capability that harmed me. It was my fear that harmed me. It was my fear that backtracked me, that paralyzed me, that made me second guess myself. And only because I second guessed myself did I inflict physical harm on myself. And I was like thinking about that when I was walking to dinner afterwards and looking at the bruises on my legs. And it actually astounded me. And I was like, I need to talk about this in the podcast, because this is something that, yes, is like an example of a physical fear and a physical infliction and a physical harm, in which I actually had bruises on my body for like 3 weeks post-Croatia. But it made me think of like, isn't that just such a metaphor for life, of like how we allow fear to paralyze us so much that it wasn't the height of what we were scared of. It was just the feelings that we're incapable, you know? Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's a story that really inspired this episode. And like I said, all the other things that I shared about like dating and what I'm navigating right now. Yeah, it's just something that's so prevalent on my mind. But with that said, Marissa, I would love to pass it off to you and hear about any stories around fear that you may have experienced in your own life.
Mine is kind of a similar one, or at least what had come to mind, in the sense that it's like a physical fear. And I think why I want to share this is it's just such an accurate depiction of what kind of happens like emotionally, like you were saying, of like second guessing yourself. And for me, it was actually when I was learning to snowboard. So this was maybe like 4 years ago. My husband and his family had grown up snowboarding, so they took me out over like Christmas time, and I had no fear of it at all. Like I was so excited and stoked to get out there and just go for it. And it was going really well. And then quickly I realized, which I don't know why I had never thought of this, like obviously you're snowboarding down an incline, so it's like a cliff or a hill. And I remember I saw the like direction in which you could fall, like what would happen if you went off the trail, like down the cliff essentially. And I just suddenly freaked myself out. Like same thing. I just was so focused on like, oh no, I don't really know how to steer yet. Like I know how to stay on my board, but that's about it. I don't feel super confident in like my navigational ability. So I just became so focused on that, and I kept going in the direction of like the cliff. Oh, wow. And so I would have to just like thrust myself back so I would like fall, but fall not down the cliff, if that makes sense. And I remember my husband looked back at me and he's like, why do you keep like, you actually do know how to steer. Why do you keep like going near the edge? And I was like, I don't know. I just like am so afraid of it. And then he watched me going down and he's like, you're going down the cliff because you're looking at it. Like, you are not looking where you are supposed to be headed. You are so focused on not going there that is where your eyes keep looking. Therefore, that is the direction your body is going. And I was like, wow, that is so embarrassing. But also it was crazy because instantly, like, when he told me that and I made it an intention to actually focus on him, and anytime I noticed myself going in that direction, he was like, just point at me, like, just literally point, like, 'cause he was going in front of me. He's like, stick your arm out and just point where I'm going. And every time it worked. And obviously that's like, again, kind of a silly story, but I think it just so perfectly depicts what happens when we're afraid. Like, had I not been afraid, I never would have even gotten close to the side of the edge. And it's just when we let our minds go there, that's what we focus on. And then unintentionally, we can kind of end up drifting that way. And I think that happens so often mentally. And we see this with like anxiety or just fears that surface. We're so afraid of messing something up. We're so afraid of like ruining a relationship or something that we can kind of self-sabotage, because honestly, that's what I was doing. I was essentially self-sabotaging because I was fully capable of doing this safely. And likewise, same, you were as well. And we just get so afraid and so in our heads and so focused on the outcome we don't want that we're actually unintentionally creating that outcome. So I think for me, something just I've realized is setting my sights on the thing I do want. Let that be the thing I focus, meditate, pray on. Be focused on the good, because naturally you're gonna head in that direction. And I mean, specific to this, like what we're saying, these fears, yes, it's good to have fear be a signal if we're actually in danger, but we both knew we were not actually in danger. And so we're just putting ourselves in danger because that is where our mind is resting, is in an unsafe place. And so I think, yeah, just to kind of I guess wrap up my thoughts on that, something I'm just working on personally is just making sure that what I'm focused on is the good and the hope and the outcome in which fear does not exist. Because like you were saying, the three options in the beginning, that anxiety is not actually a rational fear, because that anxiety does not presently exist. It exists in our minds. And so yeah, that's what I'm learning about fear and working on.
Wow. I feel like I honestly needed to hear that. Like, that was so helpful for me. And I feel like so encouraging for my heart. Like, truly. Makes me kind of emotional. But yeah, I think just to continue on, it's like that is what fear does. Like, it causes more harm than good. And it's just a hindrance to us. And I love what you said of like, when we just focus on like the good, that's the direction we're being led to, versus when we're focusing on the bad or the scary or the unknown, whatever it may be. It's like that is naturally the direction we start heading down. And I even think about like when I was moving to LA, I don't know how many times you guys have heard me bring this up, which is also crazy because in October, it'll be my 1 year since I moved.
Wow.
So crazy. But I think about moments when, you know, I accepted my job and had my apartment in place, and when things were, the traction was there, the momentum was moving me forward. But then there was this brief moments of fear that was like, oh my gosh, like what if people aren't going to be nice because of, you know, the stereotypes I heard, or, oh my gosh, like what if I don't find like a church I love, or what if making friendships is actually really hard? And there was just moments that all these what ifs were just paralyzing me. And I hadn't even arrived yet. I hadn't even experienced anything yet. And it's funny how in hindsight, I even had those fears in the first place, because when I see how my life has unfolded, and that is not to say there hasn't been challenges along the way, but I see now more clearly in hindsight that what God had for me was so much better than anything I was even fearing. Like, all those fears were made up in my head. Like there wasn't anything that was presently showing me that that is what I needed to be afraid of. And I feel like God just took those fears and like washed them away. And so I just want to speak on that. If there's anything that we can learn from even the stories we've shared and the many more we can share about being scared, is that it ultimately just causes more harm than good to us in our lives. And our greatest encouragement to you is to confront the thing in your life that is causing you to be afraid in this moment. Whether it's like me and you have fears in dating, whether it's, my fear of like you're evaluating someone and you're trying to decide if you want to move forward, or whether it's the fear of your singleness or the fear of the relationship you're in and feeling like it's not where you thought it would be, or whether it's a fear in, I don't know, maybe you're transferring colleges, or maybe you're trying to choose a new job. Maybe you're looking to move out of the city or the home that you live in. Whatever is inflicting fear in your life, whether even like personal fears, like insecurities with yourself, like showing up into a room and feeling like you're not good enough, or you're not beautiful enough, or you're not intelligent enough, or the fear that you have to do something in order to arrive to the perfect outcome in your head. I just pray that this conversation can allow you and invite you to confront whatever fear is presently weighing in your life, and just to speak the reminder over you that that fear may not be true. It may never be true. And the greatest thing that we can do is acknowledge it and make ourselves so aware that the fear does not that it doesn't have to exist, because I think we're human and I think we're meant to feel the sting of fear in this life. But I think about it this way, and this is actually a beautiful metaphor that God gave me yesterday for a friend that I was talking to. When you think of the ocean, which we're so blessed to live by the ocean, when you think of the ocean, when you watch the ocean, the most beautiful part of the ocean is the waves, the way the waves crash on the shore. That's what's so captivating. That's what's so beautiful. It's the momentum. It's the sound. It's the sound of the waves that we crave. But at the same time, we equally know that if we are standing in the midst of the waves, the impact of the wave really, really hurts. And it can knock you off your feet, and it can sweep you away. And I think that is such a metaphor for life, and that's such a metaphor for fear, is that what may be one of the most beautiful things in your life, a beautiful decision to make, a beautiful opportunity, a moment, I don't know, in your life, whatever it may be, what may be so beautiful in your life, it may also bring immense impact in your life. And it may hit you. It may kind of sting. It may bring that unsteadiness. It may sweep you off your feet. But reminding yourself that if you are in the midst of the impact of that wave that caused the fear, know that at the same time, it's simultaneously creating something so beautiful in your life. And I feel like that's just a metaphor that God gave me when I was like sitting by the ocean yesterday. And I just felt like I wanted to share that in this moment. With that said, I think there's also practical ways that we can consider confronting fear. And Marissa, you're so good at the practical side of things. I feel like I operate in such the emotion side of things. So I would love to hear if you have any advice or wisdom for yourself, for me, or anyone listening on how to confront and acknowledge those fears that we may be having.
Yeah, actually, this is so funny because before we even recorded this episode, or we knew we were going to record this episode, I had this video pop up on, I think just Instagram Reels a few weeks ago, and it was this psychologist, and he was talking about fear and how to overcome fear. And he was saying that those emotions you're feeling when you're afraid, you cannot lie to your body. So if I'm getting a physical reaction in a moment because I realize how afraid I am and my heart's beating fast and all of those things, I cannot convince my body that I'm not afraid, because I am, and I'm feeling it in its full manifestation physically. But what I can do is acknowledge that, okay, I'm afraid, but I'm going to choose to push past this fear, and I'm going to choose to be brave. And so it's funny because recently I've been learning how to surf, and I have had some physical confrontations of fear that I didn't even realize I've had. And so I have just told myself that when I get afraid and I'm in the ocean and it feels unpredictable, I just tell myself, I'm afraid right now, but I am going to choose to be brave in this moment. And every time the fear is always so much worse. Like, I have not had anything actually scary happen. It's all just in my mind. But I've noticed as I start to choose to be brave or courageous, or if in your case, choose to actually make that leap and have trust and faith in the outcome and faith that it will be a good thing, you'll realize that that muscle to overcome that fear actually becomes so strong. And I feel like we talk about this so often with our emotions. I really feel like controlling our emotions and being intentional with how we operate is like exercise.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's been doing that mental exercise as much as I can. So if I'm feeling afraid, just choosing to push past it, be courageous in that moment. And number one, it feels so good. Like physically, you feel that release and you get that like instant dopamine and that rush. But also, it's just so healthy for your mind, because I think fear can be helpful when it's used as a signal. Like when we see it as like a little flag sticking up, like maybe a little red flag, and we're like, okay, let me evaluate this situation. Let me evaluate if I'm actually in harm's way. But then when we can actually take a second, breathe and evaluate and realize that's irrational. Like I actually am safe, or I actually am physically capable of jumping off this cliff, or I am capable of making the move or talking to this person. You can realize that it's okay to have those fears surface, but we don't have to indulge them, and we can strengthen our muscle by just choosing to push past it, choosing to physically be brave and go up and talk to that person or make that decision that you know you really want to make. And I think it's going to be hard in the beginning. I think we're both saying, like, there's no way to deny that operating from a place of fear is challenging, but it will get to be so much easier. And I think even just the older I've gotten, just as like a quick encouragement, and I've made decisions to switch colleges, to start our own business, like to marry my husband, like all of these things that they were scary in the moment. And some of them have failed. Like there have been decisions I've made where I'm like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that, or maybe that wasn't the best decision ever. I always have looked back and been so thankful, because there was something I needed to learn in that. So I just say that as an encouragement, that if you find the fear is because you're afraid of failing or making the wrong step, I can assure you that that will either teach you something you needed to know, or that you can get back on track very easily. Like God is so gracious in redirecting our steps, and he allows for us to make so much error in our life. And so he's just every time has graciously put me back on the path, set my sights on the hope and the good that lies ahead. And I just need to continue to trust him and push past those fears that just surface in a moment.
That's so powerful. And I think that beautifully just kind of leads us to conclude this conversation on fear, is that ultimately for Marissa and I, like, we really believe that faith just triumphs all fear. And I think fear is something that we will inevitably experience here on earth. And I think as scary as it is, it's also is that praise that we are capable of being shown the signals when there's something scary or something unknown. But I think that is the beautiful thing about putting our faith in God, is that I am not meant or intended to know the outcome of all things in my life. I am not meant to know what tomorrow holds. I'm not meant to know what a year from now holds, or 10 years, let alone how long of a life I have here on earth. I'm not meant to hold the answers to that. And for myself and Marissa speaking, that is where my faith triumphs my fear of, wow, I can surrender that it's all in my control. I can surrender the worry and the grasp and the grip I have on my life, that dang, I have to figure it all out, and I have to know the outcome, and I alone have to be capable of authoring the life that I want or the beauty that's ahead. It's like I can only do so much because I am so limited. I am human. I'm limited by my own fears. And to know that there's a God that loves every one of us so immensely, that he's bigger than the things we're fearing in life. And not only is he bigger than it, he's already ahead of you. He already knows the decisions that lie before you. He already knows the insecurities that are in your heart. He already knows the question marks hanging over your life. He already knows the successes and the failures, and he's in all of it. And for myself, when I look in the face of my fears and I just cast them to God, of like, God, I am so not capable of navigating this on my own. Like, I have to give this to you because my hands are failing me so deep. That is where my faith triumphs my fear, and that is where my rest is found, and that is where my peace is found. So I want to read Matthew 6:34, which says, "Therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own." And I think that's such a beautiful reminder that God reminds each and every one of us that we are not intended to be looking ahead. We are not intended to try and predict what our life will hold. Like I've shared 1,000 times and will continue to share, never in my life could I have imagined I would move to LA. But also never in my life could I imagine I'd be sitting here and recording this podcast. And now I'm sitting here in the face of two of my favorite blessings. And these are both things I could have never predicted. And if I were to sit and try to predict my life, I would have been so wrong anyways. And so I think that's just the beauty of not allowing the fear of tomorrow to trouble our today. Easier said than done. It will always probably trouble us, but that is like the greatest hope to cling to. And then I also want to read John 14:27, that this is what God just gives us. And it is this peace. And it reads, "Peace I leave with you, and my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, and neither let them be afraid." And I think that is such a steadfast reminder that the things of this world, the worries of tomorrow, the desires of our heart, everything of this world, like, it can inflict worry and concern and fear. But when we can step outside of that, even though we are so living in this world, and we can find a peace that trespasses any decision you're making, any fear you're in the face of, that is where the hope and the anchor and just like the steadfastness can be found in our lives. And I know for myself, in the presence of fear, when I feel like I don't know where to turn, like, that is the only place I can turn to is my faith, and is the deep belief that God is beside me and before me, and he's got me in that. And so, yeah, that's our final encouragement over fear. Marissa, do you have any other thoughts on that?
No, I love that you ended. That's one of my favorite verses. And I think my biggest encouragement is just something I've learned myself, which is just to let it go. When I'm feeling afraid, it's because I'm trying to grab the reins of my life, and I'm just not, that's not in my human capacity to do so. And when you're reminded of God's character and how much he desires for you to have a beautiful and good future, and that is who is guiding your steps, it just alleviates any fear of the future. Like, I know it's so hard, but just being so specific in your prayers to just pray for peace amidst your fears, pray that God helps you surrender those over. And then the only thing you have to do is just literally open your hands and let them go, because he is so eager to give you that peace and to guide your life and your steps, and he will do an amazing job. Okay, you guys, it's time for love notes. On the topic of fear, I came up with a game called Would You Send It? And I just came up with some things that I feel like are common fears for a lot of us. And I just wanted to see if Brie and I would be brave enough to do these things.
I have no idea what they are, so that'll be a surprise.
I have a feeling you're going to do more than I would. Okay, number one is, would you ever go skydiving?
Yes, I would send it.
I'm surprised you haven't, actually.
I actually was supposed to go skydiving in 2020, in Australia.
That's so specific.
For my birthday.
That's so
April
fun.
2020. And then we all know what happened in 2020. Literally the month before I was supposed to go, everything shut down. So I still have never done it.
You were supposed to go to Australia. I was supposed to have a wedding.
I know, jeez.
These plans that change.
Yeah.
I think skydiving I would like to do. I'm surprised I haven't done that. Thankfully, I feel like fear of heights is just one thing I don't have. So I would be super down.
Praise the Lord.
I just never really have like thought to go out of my way to do that. Number 2 is swimming with sharks.
You know, it's so funny because growing up, I lived for Shark Week on like,
Really?
What's that channel? You know, y'all
Yes,
probably know what I'm
remember.
talking about. Where it's like the week where it's like all about the sharks, and I loved it. And I loved watching people get in the cages and swim with sharks. So I think like the little girl version of me is like, yes, that's my dream come true. The adult version of me, I feel like I could see myself being like just watching someone get in the cage.
Yeah.
Depends on what kind of sharks they are. If I'm in a cage, that's fine. I think it'd be fine. But if it's like a great white, no.
Yeah. And I was thinking more so like intentionally swimming with sharks, so sharks that you know like wouldn't hurt you.
Oh.
So yeah, like maybe in a cage or something. And I think I would totally do that. I just don't know that I have a desire to.
I have a weird desire too.
I mean, I do think sharks are really beautiful creatures, so like I would love to interact with them in some capacity. But also just like, I think for me, the cage, like I just don't know if I want to go down in a cage in the ocean.
That sounds almost scarier.
Yeah, so I think that's the part that makes me nervous. So I don't think I'll ever do that, but I would never say never to that one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Maybe I'll unintentionally swim with a shark.
Oh gosh, let's pray not. Not while we're surfing.
Okay, the next one is holding a snake.
I think I'll pass. I really don't want. No.
Even those like long ones that people take photos with.
Yeah, I think they're icky.
I'm not gonna lie, snakes do kind of give me the like, that feeling. So I don't think I could. I would pet one, but I could never see myself holding one, especially when they start to like wrap around your neck or your face.
Absolutely
I'm like,
not.
That's gonna be a no. Yeah.
I was walking the boardwalk yesterday in Venice, which if you've ever been to Venice, you know it's like a show down there.
Oh no.
And there was just a guy casually walking around with a snake on him, and I'm like, I almost didn't even bat an eye because it's like you see crazier things in Venice.
Yeah.
But I was like, that could never be me.
That's my fear. I feel like people like that will almost put the snake on you.
Yeah,
they
I'm like, don't.
They're like, ooh, this is funny. And I'm like, no.
It's not funny. I'm terrified for my life.
The next one is bungee jumping.
So that's actually one I absolutely could never see myself doing, which is
Really?
so funny because I feel less scared at the thought of jumping out of a plane, but more scared at the thought of bungee jumping. I don't like the thought of jumping off a cliff and retracting. That motion sounds
Really?
so painful to me. I don't know why. It's always sounded so scary.
That's so interesting. I don't think I would ever do cliff jumping into the water because I'm afraid I would like break something because I've seen people land weird. But I don't think I'm desiring to bungee jump, but I would just because from what I've seen, it seems pretty safe.
Yeah.
So I think I like the idea knowing that I wouldn't hit the water. I would
And then you bounce up. You say, I don't like that. I feel like the whiplash I would have.
Yeah, I guess
I don't know why that makes me more scared.
I guess I would actually want to like watch videos and see it.
Let me do my research.
Yeah. I'm very much a research before. I'm like measuring my risk level. I'm like, okay, there's only a 0.5% chance of injury. Okay, I'll do it.
That's so funny.
And then the next one is backpacking for a week in a foreign country.
Oh, easy. Yes. That's an easy yes.
That feels very you.
Yeah.
I think actually what scares me about this is truly just if I'm thinking like backpacking where you're like camping kind of in the middle of nowhere, having food for a week, that is actually what makes me the most afraid. I know there are a lot of things that like you can pack your food for. I don't know, that scares me, like carrying my food for a week. That's where I draw the line.
Don't make me do it. It won't fit in my backpack.
Yeah, I don't know. I just couldn't see myself needing everything I would need and being able to carry that.
I guess I didn't think about that. I guess I was like, I'll stop at the grocery store. But no, I would definitely do it. That sounds like a fun challenge.
I would do it if it was like backpacking in the city. I feel like that's kind of cheating. But backpacking,
Just
like,
put your backpack on and walk.
I'm like, yeah, I guess that doesn't make sense. Me justifying the glamping.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just not cut out for it. I think that's what we're discovering. Okay, the last one is learning to fly a helicopter. So like doing the classes and learning how to fly.
I feel like that's probably a lot of commitment. But like, I would be down. I'd be down. I went on my first helicopter ride when I was in the Hamptons this weekend.
Ooh.
That was my first time ever. We helicoptered out.
That's so fun.
And I was like, this is so fun. I feel like I'm like a toy in the sky.
Yeah.
I felt like it wasn't going fast, even though it probably was going really fast. I was like, this is fun. I want to be the captain or pilot, whatever, not captain.
Aww,
So
that's so fun.
I would do it. Yeah, I would do it.
I would do it, but again, I'm not gonna go out of my way to do it just because I'm never gonna own a helicopter, so I just
Never
don't know.
say never.
Yeah,
Just kidding.
true. But I just don't know that I need to do that. But sure.
Yeah.
I'm like, with all of these, if there was an incentive, I'd be down.
Yeah, sure. I feel like you actually said yes, or you said yes to sending it to more things than I did.
I am shocked.
I'm shocked too.
You're wearing off on me.
Yeah.
But we hope you, as always, enjoyed it, and we will see you in our next one. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. We pray this episode was encouraging and life-giving. If you found it valuable, please share it with a friend, leave a review, and subscribe.
And be sure to follow us along over on Instagram at With Love Always Podcast. Signing off with all of our love always, Bree
And Marissa.